Yep, ready.
Good morning everybody and welcome to our next workshop. Today we will be learning about how to make your own fertilisers and soil improvers. This is all stuff from home. I haven't purchased anything special. This is all stuff that most people will have around the home, and we've just had a really big conversation here just now about food waste and composting, and it sort of all is relevant to the same sort of thing. You know, I'm a big advocate, as most of you will know, for you know, not spending a lot of extra money, and there's a lot of things you can do for free or for really, really cheap. And so we'll go through that today with doing fertilisers and more, in my opinion, more importantly, soil improvers. So the difference between a soil improver and a fertiliser and is that your soil improvers are going to improve every aspect of the soil. It's going to help turn your dirt into soil, and you're going to get healthier plants from it. So a soil improver helps with building organic matter in the soil, which helps retain moisture, and it's going to help promote healthy root growth, healthy plants. The more organic matter and the more soil improving you can do, the less water you need to use, the less inputs you have to put in, the less, you know, at home, like I can sometimes go a month or two without fertilising. I'm not very routine with my fertiliser, and realistically, because my soil is so healthy, I probably could get away with not fertilising very often anyway. And the more you improve your soil, the less you need to fertilise. So that first season, you know, you've got your dirt, especially if you're using the Pindan, you've got to continuously fertilise it to feed your plants. But the more each season you go along that you improve your soil, you will feel the need to fertilise less and less. You'll get less disease, less pests. It's just a long process. And it just really improves, and you can see the difference between, you know, if you pick up the Pindan, it's just, there's nothing there, you know, there's no structure to it, it doesn't hold water. When you do water, you've got to water it multiple times a day because it just doesn't hang on to anything. Whereas when you have a look at the soil in the garden, it's rich, it's dark, you can feel the water content in it, it's just hanging on to it. And obviously healthy soil makes a healthy plant, makes a healthy person. Fertilisers, on the other hand, and fertilisers still have their place, they do. Do you want to move? You know, fertilisers have their place. They will give your plants the quick hit that they need. So especially if you, like for me, I overplant, so I don't listen to or follow the advice of packaging where it says spacing. So I've always got extra. So obviously they're going to take extra nutrients out. So when I fertilise, it just sort of helps them give that boost. And each element of a fertiliser is going to help your plant in a different way. So when we do our soil improvers, that's a slow release and just a steady, I guess a bit like a multivitamin. You know, you get that slow release throughout the day that just keeps you going. Whereas a fertiliser is, I guess, a bit like a Red Bull or a coffee or a Coke, where you just need that instant kick to get you through. And fertilisers still do absolutely have their place, especially you know, when we're getting towards the end of the season, the soil might be a bit tired. Giving it a fertilise, it will help just keep going. And with your different elements for fertiliser, you need different bits, so different parts of your fertiliser will help with promoting more flowers, and then another part of your fertiliser will help with actually setting those flowers into fruit. So yeah, you do still need them, but the healthier your soil is, the less you need them. And I do find that here, I think in places that aren't Port Hedland or aren't, you know, in extreme heat, I don't think they have to work as hard to put as much effort into the soil improving. Whereas, you know what your soil looks like before you work on your soil all season, and sort of midway through the season, it's looking beautiful and rich and healthy. And then you leave it over summer, and when you come back to it sort of in April, it kind of looks a bit like Pindan again. The heat here just eats the organic matter, it just burns it away. So that's why we have to just continuously add organic matter in. Whereas if you look at, say, the East Coast, New Zealand has just beautiful gold soil. You know, I come from Victoria, and in Victoria, Sylvan, where my great grandparents were, that's a red soil, and on the East Coast, red soil means gold. You know, it's beautiful, it's rich, it's that volcanic soil. Whereas here, it's crap, it's rubbish. So I think they don't have to add as much as we do in here. So it's another sort of layer of what we have to do more. Is just continually improve the soil. So your most common nutrients that your soil needs is your NPK, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. And all of those things you can actually make for free from things you're going to throw out at home. Or you can get them for free from shops here in town, or from out at the horse stables. You can go and buy the stuff, and that's fantastic. You can even buy it organically, but you can make it yourself. Now obviously the stuff you make yourself is not going to be scientifically balanced. You're not going to know the exact amount of grams of this to put in and that to put in, but it's all trial and error. If you can see that, you know, you've got a ton of leaf growth but no fruit set, you may have too much nitrogen, not enough potassium and phosphorus. So it's just about, you know, trial and error and finding out what works for you. Whereas if you grow mostly greens, you know, if you're into growing all your leafy greens, Asian greens, kale, silver beet, all that sort of stuff, then a heavy nitrogen fertilizer would be great. Whereas if you were growing tomatoes and capsicums and things like that, you would need more of the phosphorus and the potassium rather than the nitrogen. So I would just, as you're starting out, just make a one size fits all and use that. And then if you find that you do need to make the different things, because you're making it yourself, you can actually make a specific one just for potassium, or just for phosphorus, or just for nitrogen, where you would just make a single ingredient instead of adding them all together. So you can, you know, if you've got that much time and energy, you can break it down to each individual nutrient. So yeah, your nitrogen adds in rapid plant growth. It increases seed production capacity and strengthens your leaves. So yeah, your nitrogen and all fertilizers are really heavy on nitrogen, because obviously all of the plants we grow have leaves. Whether we eat them or not is another thing. But the majority of leaves that we have in our garden are edible. So you know, you can use that for that anyway. Phosphorus is for root strength and the production of flowers, and obviously the stronger your root structure is, the better your soil is as well, because you're going to have, if you've got lots of food, your roots are in there, you've got all your beneficial microorganisms and your fungi. They're going to help with your help feed on your roots and help do all that soil health thing. So having good strong roots is really important. And then obviously the production of flowers is very, very important for anything that grows from a flower. So if you are low, you know, if your tomatoes just aren't flowering, maybe you don't have enough phosphorus in there for it to actually produce the flower. Then we come to potassium, and potassium is really good for disease prevention. So enough potassium in there will just make your plant a bit stronger, but it's also to aid in fruit set. So that's why a lot of people will use banana peels on tomatoes, because they're high in potassium. And so you need your phosphorus to get the flower, but then you need the potassium for it to help the flower set into fruit, so that it's a strong, healthy flower, which is going to help with pollination and that pollination taking.
God, bring item on camera. What does that mean?
So they're your three main ones. Another really, really important one that's usually not added into a lot of these mixes, or it's not talked about, is calcium. Calcium it helps with the proper formation of your plant growth. So if you've got new leaves that are coming out, they're all old and stunted and just not looking healthy, it's quite possibly a calcium deficiency. And also calcium also stops your blossoming growth. Calcium is in the soil. Inconsistent water lock calcium up. So you do a part of having and even if you add your calcium in, if you're not consistently watering, it's not going to be able to the nutrients are not going to be accessible to your plants. So, you know, if you water once a day, make sure you water once every day. If you water twice a day, make sure you water twice every day. Because your inconsistency is what will cause the calcium to lock up, and a lot of the other nutrients, but calcium in particular. And that's where you get blossom end rot. So yeah, and there are ways you can deal with blossom end rot in a slow release way or instantly as well. So soil improvers, it is important to add more organic matter in at the beginning of each growing season, and if required throughout the season if you have hungry crops. Things like corn, just take it out. Like corn is such a hungry feeder. So that's something you do have to know. So, all right, I'm going to put corn in. I'm going to need to keep on top of improving the soil and fertilising, because they take a lot of nutrients out. Soil improvers can be many different things. The fastest way to improve your soil before the growing season is to add manure to the top of your beds. I find that they can often be somewhat hydrophobic though. You know, you get it, and if it's, you know, we need the manure to be nice and aged, but because it's nice and aged, there's no moisture left in it, and so when you put it straight on top of your garden bed and you water it, it just runs straight off. So it does take a while to get that, to get rid of the hydrophobic conditions quite often, and you can get a water
Wetting agent?
what's it called? A wetting agent, yep, you can, but again, you got to buy that, so I don't bother. You can just use dishwashing liquid. So if you use like your Earth Choice, which is your environmentally friendly one, you can just squirt a bit of that on your soil and water it in, bam. I don't do that anymore, but I used to do that, but that is a quick way to get it done if you need it now, and you don't have to chuck a lot in, it doesn't take much. Do an experiment when you get home, get some soil, chuck a tiny bit of dishwashing liquid in, water it in, and see the difference it makes. So what I do instead is I use hay, because the hay will absorb it, so more organic matter. So instead of putting in an additive, I'll use hay. Hay is a fantastic soil improver. It helps build structure, because obviously it's, you know, it was just grass or wheat or pea straw or whatever. It'll hang on to a lot of water. So what I normally do is at the end of the season, I leave my mulch on there. Quite often by the start of the next season, that's all been eaten away anyway, but you leave it there. Because I don't dig my soil, it keeps all the nutrients in, it keeps all the bacteria and the fungi alive, whereas when we dig it, that kills that. And it's easier, it's less work if we don't dig the soil. So I will normally at home, or even here, put a layer of hay down, and then put my my next lot of manure or compost straight on top of that. I don't dig it in, but then sometimes it does take that little bit of extra effort to get the water holding capacity again. Excuse me. But if you mix it with hay, the hay will help hang on to it, and it helps it turn, you know, get more water holding capacity pretty quickly. And then as the season goes on, that hay slowly breaks down and adds a lot more organic matter. The free hay that you can get from the stables is just, it's absolute gold. It's so good, and especially when they've been mucking out the stables and it's got the urine in it as well as the poo, it's absolutely perfect for your gardens. Compost takes time to make, but it is the best soil improver you can add. So everything, and I mean, we've done lots of workshops on compost, and I talk about compost all the time. Composting is probably very, very close to number one for soil improving. But it takes so long to make. So you couldn't decide today, like you've seen what the compost looks like at Trelaw, and it looks disgusting at the moment. It's going to take time. So if you really were in a bind, you could use what you've got there now, but it is still it's not ready. Whereas with your compost, all the stuff you've put in there, obviously those nutrients stay in the soil. When it becomes compost, it stays in there. So all your different elements are in that compost, but you can't decide today that you're going to compost and use it next week. So composting is a long-term one, but if you keep that going, like you say, Sarah, you've had compost for years, so you've always got it there. You know, and you can continually make that, and the compost is amazing. But if you've just started gardening, obviously you don't have compost there. So what I would recommend, if you want to use compost next season, you need to start getting onto that now, start building it now, and then by the time it's time to plant again in April next year, you've got your compost there ready made. You could mix that in with some horse manure or cow manure or hay, and that would help it again, and that would just get in more nutrients. And that's so, but yeah, like I say, it's a long-term thing, composting for soil improving, but it is perfect. Where are we up to? Digging, I've already done that one. So yeah, at the start of each season, you just add your organic matter straight on top. Mulch is also a really great thing to use. Again, it helps keep your water in, keeps your moisture in, you need to water less. But it also breaks down, so you know, when you put it on at the start of the season, it'll be this thick, and by the time you rip your plants out at the end of the season, it might be this thick. It's spent that whole season breaking down and decomposing and improving your soil. Living mulches are also a really good one. I'm starting to really explore with living mulch this year. So I'm going to get food while my food is mulching the soil. Like if you've ever grown sweet potato, and because you leave it in there for such a long time, all that dead leaf matter just breaks down underneath. And so if you have a look at if you lift up your sweet potato, you've got this beautiful rich layer sitting on top because all those old leaves have died, and it's really moist, and it takes a lot for a sweet potato patch to really dry out because you've got what's called a living mulch, and it covers the whole patch. So what I'm doing at home this year, I've got this really, really enormous bed, and I've got a lot of crops in there, but I've also put in some watermelon, and I've put in some sweet potato. I'm also going to put in some pumpkin, and I'm going to let it run absolutely rampant through the whole bed, and that's going to work as a mulch. Now I haven't had to pay, you know, $25 for a bale of hay, and I'm going to get food out of it. And then because those three crops in particular will last all through summer, in theory I will have a living mulch all over my garden beds all through summer, which is going to stop it from drying out in the heat. It's going to stop it from going hydrophobic. And I have, again, because when I use hay, I pretty much have to do that twice a year. And so if I'm paying for pea straw in the quantities I needed at home, that's about $200 a year plus, just for the pea straw, to use it at the beginning and at the end to try and keep my soil over summer. Whereas if I can chuck in some some sweet potato runners, some watermelon seeds and some pumpkin seeds, which have cost me nothing, and then we've had food over summer as well. So again, it's a free thing, or close to free. Obviously we're still going to have to water it, but my soil in theory is going to be a lot better next year because I haven't let it dry out over summer. But yeah, so mulching, it also keeps your temperature of your soil more even as well. And then obviously that's going to help with your plants stay healthy because they're not getting that hot, cold, hot, cold. It's just a little bit more even. Even a couple of degrees difference can make, can make a huge difference. I know I've got friends they don't live in Karratha now, but a few years ago, she would post her first tomatoes of the season like we all do, and her tomatoes would always be ready easily that 3 or 4 weeks before mine, because they're just that couple of degrees cooler. And then I think from memory she used to get them later, just that little bit later in the season, because again they're just that little bit cooler. So if you can keep your soil at an even temperature and then cooler once it comes to that end of the season, you will hopefully get more length out of your season as well. And then at the end of the season you just leave your mulch there. You don't need to take it off and put it in the compost bin. You can leave it there and it'll continue to break down. It'll be gone by the next season, but it's gone into your soil. Unless you have chickens that dig it up and eat it, like me. Worm castings are also, but they call the stuff black gold. It is just absolute dynamite. But again, worm castings requires a worm farm. Worm farms require effort. So it's not one that you can say, oh, I want worm castings this year, and start a worm farm. It again takes time, and worm farming in Port Hedland has a lot of challenges. With the heat, the worms don't like it so much. But last year I emptied out the worm farm completely and started again, and I used all the castings throughout the beds. I've got worms pretty much everywhere now. So in your castings has also got worm eggs. So even if you, like I said, this year I didn't empty it out and I haven't put more worms in it, even though the worms die off over summer when it's too hot, the eggs seem to survive. So if you have a look in my worm farm now, it's full of worms, but they're all just little tiny baby worms. But because I didn't start again and put more worms in, I haven't been able to use the castings this year in the garden to the quantities that I would have liked. But the stuff is just, and so you can use your worm castings as a fertilizer, so as a soil improver, and put it directly onto your garden. Your eggs are going to hatch and you're going to get worms in your garden so long as you look after your soil. Or you can use it as a fertilizer and use it instantly. So that's again a lot of things that you can use as a soil improver you can also use as a fertilizer. So you're not having to double up, you just use them in different ways. So you can make your soil improver and go, right, well this is going to be used for long term, but I need something tomorrow as well. I'm going to adapt it and make it into a fertilizer, which will give us a quick hit of what the slow release is. So yeah, whereas fertilizers also play a vital role in our garden. They give us that quick hit of energy. So yeah, like a Coke, like a coffee, like a Red Bull. Although probably a bit healthier than a Coke, coffee and a Red Bull. But yeah, like I said, a lot of things you can use for fertilizers, and your homemade fertilizers can be just used from stuff, and we're going to go through that in a minute with things that I've just brought from my home today that we can actually repurpose and not throw them in the bin, which again reduces landfill. It goes to so making a simple product from home is not, it doesn't matter why you're doing it, but it could be, hey, money's a bit tight, can't afford to go and spend $40 on a bag of fertilizer, I'm going to make it myself. Or hey, some money's not really an issue for us, but I hate putting my scraps into landfill, which is me. I hate putting anything into landfill that doesn't have to go in there. Bones is a big one for me, so I'm going to try and do this more often. This is one part of my food waste that I really lack in. So hopefully by teaching this today, it's going to give me a bit of that push to actually sort of, put the money where my mouth is and actually take on this practice myself, because I'm going to ask you all to do it. So some of the key ingredients that you can use to make your own fertilizers and soil improvers is manures. So cow, horse, chicken, goat, rabbit, sheep. Obviously we can't really get a lot of sheep manure here. If you've got friends that have goat manure is absolutely amazing. Chickens, you will find that the majority of chicken owners will not part with chicken manure. I know I don't, because you want it for your own garden. But yeah, you can buy chicken manure, and and that's fine as well. You can also buy a pelletized chicken manure, and the pelletized chicken manure you can actually just soak in water and let it dissolve, and that'll do the same thing. Obviously, the cow manure we can get from out at, we can buy it in the small bags, or you can get it by the trailer load out at Red Bank. And horse manure we can get free all year round. Horse manure really is a really valuable asset here. We are so lucky to be able to get it for free, because most places, especially in the cities, wouldn't have a horse stable. There's nowhere that you could walk into in Perth and go, hi, I know you've got really expensive race horses, but I'm just going to come in, take the manure. There's no way, you wouldn't get in the front gate. I mean, Sarah, you've had horses, so you would know that.
We always see all the garden people come out and grab pull and stuff. Is great.
Yeah, whereas here they call us booth fairies and they love us, so long as we're respectful of property. Whereas elsewhere you wouldn't be able to do that. Hay and organic grass clippings. Now I say organic grass clippings just because if you're doing, if you've got a beautiful, fantastic green lawn up here, especially with things like armyworm, with keeping it beautiful, you're probably putting a lot of chemicals in it. possibly putting a lot of chemicals into it, I probably wouldn't use those. But if you're not putting a lot of additives or nasty stuff into your grass, use that, because your grass is full of nitrogen. So when you you cut your grass, keep some of that to use, and that's a really good addition. Banana peels are really fantastic. They're full of potassium. Coffee grounds are full of nitrogen. They're a really good one. I had a bag to bring, but I've left it at home. But again, coffee grounds are free. If you don't have a coffee machine at home, all of the cafes here are more than happy to give you their coffee grounds. You just have to ask. McDonald's in particular as well. If you say, hey, have you got any coffee grounds? That's stuff they don't have to put into landfill. So they're more than happy to give it to you. I like to use coffee grounds in compost because I use a lot. Like when I can get my hands on, when I make the time to go and get coffee grounds, I like to get a lot of it, and so I compost it. But you can use it in faster ways as well. Eggshells is a really good one. My chickens basically create me no waste, so I like to use the eggshells, and they're a really, really good one. Weeds have their use as fertilizer as well. Loose leaf tea or tea bags that are plastic free. If you're going to compost your tea bags, you need to make sure they're a plastic free variety. A lot of companies are slowly getting there. There are a few companies that have gotten rid of the plastic out of their tea bags, but a lot of them still have microplastics in their tea bags, and we don't want microplastics in our soil. They now know that even plants can absorb microplastics into them, and they've done studies where they've even found microplastics inside of apples, because the roots are absorbing that microplastics from out of the soil. It's coming up through the plant, is actually getting into the fruit. So be very mindful if you're using tea bags that you know that they don't have plastic in them. And obviously, if you're buying a tea bag that's got microplastics in it, you're also drinking those microplastics as well. Fish carcasses, the majority of us here have a fishing person in our family. My backyard is littered with fish carcasses. I will fairly regularly have people ring me, go, hey, we've had a huge day out on the boat today. Can we drop off the fish carcasses? Yes, you can. I will quite often give a couple to the chickens and let the chickens pick them clean, and then just dig trenches and bury it, and that's just gold for your garden. So yeah, when you go fishing, your fishing activities should be zero waste, because what we don't eat can be buried. We don't even gut the fish anymore. We just leave it in there and fill it around it, and leave all that beautiful guts in the fish and bury it straight in. And the garden beds that have got the fish carcasses, those bones break down so quick in this heat. Like, I can dig a few months later, if I've only buried one fish in an area, I can dig it up a few months later and the bones are gone. Like, they break down so quick. If you're going to do a big trench, then it takes longer. Because I know I dug up an area, I buried something else in the same spot a couple of days ago, and I'd put in like maybe 20 fish in this section maybe a year ago, and there was almost no bones left. So that's another really good nutrient. It's another way of cutting down your waste from your fishing. Even your old bait, if you don't want it in the freezer, you all know what I'm talking about, bury it. Because you're not going to use it. You're going to buy fresh stuff next time you go, and you know that. So please just bury it in your garden. Doesn't matter if it stinks, it won't stink for long in your garden. Obviously, if you've got dogs, you've got to be a bit mindful of that, but I don't, and my chickens don't tend to dig it up. Seaweed's a really fantastic one. Obviously, you've got a lot of seaweed-based fertilizer products that you can buy from the shops. We just don't get a lot of seaweed here though. Other places I've lived, the beach will just be loaded like a metre high in some places with seaweed. Whereas here, I've been on walks along the beach to try and find some seaweed, and I've come home with like this tiny little handful. So we just don't have the seaweed here. So I won't go into seaweed a lot because it's not a product that you can get in Headland for free. But if you go out fishing somewhere and you can see some seaweed, that's been washed up, not the stuff that's still live in the ocean, because that's obviously animal food, but the stuff that's washed up on the beach, if you can find it, great. Epsom salts is another really fantastic one. You see a lot of people use Epsom salts on tomatoes. Epsom salts has your magnesium in it, and that helps absorb the NPK. So it helps make your soil more available, the nutrients in your soil more available to your plants, and will help with your fruit set. And also will help, apparently it helps your tomatoes taste sweeter. And then yeah, meat bones. So meat bones is the other one that we're going to give it a go today. And so yeah, but basically what we're going to do, these buckets here, you get them from Kmart, they're like $15. If you can get the Fisher person not to steal it, they're amazing. I have them and they constantly get pinched at my place, and I have to buy more, but they cost, they're like $11 or $15 or something at Kmart, and they're fantastic. They come with a lid, and they do last quite a while out in the sun too, but if you keep them out of the sun, they'll last even longer. But what I've done with this one today is this would be my manure tea, or what I like to call poo soup. And all I've done with this is I've put in here some cow manure because I had some at home, chicken manure because I had some at home. I've added in some horse manure, and then I've got some hay here that's got goat poo in it. And so I've just put that in, I give that a mix, fill it up with water, leave it for a week or two. It's going to ferment, it's going to be foul, that's why you have to have a lid. And then you can just use that as a fertiliser. So if you wanted to use these on your garden bed, you would use them as a soil improver, and you would just add them straight down on top of your ground, on top of your garden bed. And as that breaks down, that improves your soil. Or you can use it as a fertiliser by just fermenting it. Chicken poo is one you've got to be really, really careful of. Fresh chicken poo is full of ammonia, and it will burn your plants. So it needs to be aged, and they reckon chook poo needs to be aged for like 6 months. But who has 6 months to wait to use it as a dry product? If you want to use it fresh, use it as a fertiliser and ferment it, and it'll get rid of all of that. Because after a couple of weeks, when you open this bucket up, it's not going to have a strong ammonia smell. Whereas, you know, when you go in to clean the chicken coop out, like, you nearly die. Because all you can smell is that ammonia, and it gets in and burns your lungs because you're stupid like me and don't wear a mask. Whereas when you ferment it, it doesn't have that ammonia smell. So yeah, you just give it a couple of weeks, and then all you need to do is, what I've been reading is, if you put this stuff inside a pillowcase and then put the pillowcase in the water, you then don't have to strain it and drain it off. I couldn't be bothered getting a pillowcase out today, so I've just grabbed this stuff here like this. You just fill it up with water and leave it, and then when you want to use it, it's about a 10-to-1 ratio. So you want your fertiliser to look the colour of a weak tea. So it's about roughly a litre of this stuff into a 9-litre watering can, give or take, and then you can just put it straight on your plants. So you've only had to wait a couple of weeks to use it, whereas putting it into your garden as a soil improver, it takes a long time. And yeah, once you've got your bucket on, you can't smell it. What we actually do at Trelaw Daycare, we so visit them fairly regularly. We made what we call stinky weed tea, and again, so it's another use of weeds. So obviously you don't want to, if your weeds have gone to seed, you don't want to put them in the compost. But again, you don't want to chuck them to landfill if you don't have to, because again, it creates the, you know, you build up with the waste. Another one, just get a bucket like this. At the start of the season, we got in with the Trelaw kids and weeded the garden beds, chucked them into a bucket of water, filled it up with water. After 2 weeks, all the nutrients from those weeds have stripped out of the plants, and now it's a beautiful fertiliser. So with Trelaw, we've been able to fertilise weekly, and we haven't had to pay a cent for the fertiliser, apart from the purchase of the bucket, which the bucket costs not a lot more than a bottle of fertiliser that you would then have to keep purchasing. The kids love it. They know that when they weed the garden, the weeds go straight in, and it helps make more. And what happens is, with your weed seeds in the water, it soaks them and it kills them. So after a month, 2 months, whenever you can see that you're not really getting, the water's fairly clear now, you've stripped all the nutrients out, you can then chuck that mess into your compost, and the seeds are dead. So again, you're still using the whole product and you haven't had to pay for anything. And yeah, and that's full of nitrogen, so that's a really good nitrogen-rich fertiliser. So that's that one. Another good one that my neighbour does, the leukina. So the weed tree that we have everywhere in this town that grows faster than any other plant on the planet. It's actually a nitrogen fixing plant. So if you can keep on top of these, they're actually a really good plant to have in your garden. But you've got to be able to keep on top of them and not let them go to seed. But my neighbour uses these as like a weed tea. So she will steep these in water and then use the water like we would have with the poo soup or the weed tea, because all the nitrogen in here just leaches out and you can use that. And so this again is free because everybody has these in their yard or has their neighbours with them. So that's a really good one that's free again. This is my eggshells. So this I've done in the Thermomix. So eggshells have different uses at different stages. I would never recommend putting an eggshell in its whole form into the compost because it will never ever break down. It is basically just pure calcium and carbonate. So it's like a bone basically, and they just don't break down in any sort of fastness. Whereas the more you can break it down, the faster it's going to be. So at the moment in the form it's in, like I said, I've just blitzed it in the Thermomix. It's quite small, but it's not a powder. So this would still be a slow release calcium fertiliser. Sorry, I'll continue.
Yep.
But what we're going to try today is blitzing it in the coffee grinder attachment and see if we can get that into a powder. So yeah, you can, a way of getting almost instant use out of your eggshells is you can actually soak it in vinegar, because as we all know here, vinegar strips calcium from things. So you can leave some eggshells in some white vinegar for 24 hours and the calcium will be all leached out of your eggshells, and then you can use that vinegar and eggshell water or mixture. I think it's like 10 parts water to 1 part vinegar solution. You can spray. So if you've got calcium and blossom end rot on your plants and you want that instant fix, you can't save the fruit that's already got the blossom end rot, but you can fix the next stuff coming through. Use it as a foliar spray, so put it in a spray bottle and just spray your leaves, and that will instantly get that calcium in. It's not going to help your plants long term, so that's where you also need to put your slow release in, but it will instantly help the problem at hand and give you that time to fix it properly. But yeah, eggshells are fantastic. There's lots of old wives' tales around about slugs and snails and caterpillars not liking eggshells. Oh, in my opinion, it's a myth. I bought in a massive container of eggshells a few weeks ago and got the kids to throw it everywhere. The caterpillars have not disappeared. They completely annihilated several of the cucumber patches, and we had eggshells all over that.
Yep.
So, yeah, to me, that's a no-go. Coffee grounds are absolutely fantastic. Like I said, I use them in the compost, but you can use them as a fertiliser, as a soil improver faster. You can just put it straight on the soil. You've got to be careful how you do that though. Coffee grounds are not acidic. A lot of people say, oh, they're too acidic. They're not. A coffee bean is acidic, but the processing of grinding it and putting all the hot water that gets rid of the acidity, so it's not going to damage your plants acid-wise. And the amount of coffee grounds you would have to use for it to actually make a huge difference would be astronomical, and you wouldn't just go and dump 20 kilos of coffee grounds on one small patch. So, you know, yeah. You can dry it out and use it as a long release, and what I've been reading is you can actually use it as a fast one as well. If you want a big nitrogen hit, you can actually just soak your coffee grounds in water and then just pour it straight on as basically a cup of coffee for your soil, and it will just give it that big instant hit. I haven't tried it, but I have been reading about it, and it is a fairly common one to do apparently. Meat bones, what I've done here is we had some chicken wings the other night, so I've kept the bones. I had the oven on the next night, so I chucked them in the oven while the oven was going. I wouldn't normally use the oven specifically just for this purpose though. So what I did, they were fairly dry by the time they'd come out of the oven, but I just chucked them in the tray. But because all the meat had sort of dried off it, I was able to just put them in the tray and leave them out on the deck in the sun. And because the meat was all gone by then, it didn't bring in the blowflies. If you were to put fresh meat bones out in the sun, like, it'd be hideous. But if you can dry them off in the oven first, and just get rid of that meat, then you can put them out and they don't cause a great deal of problems. Same with the banana peels. There's a lot of different ways you can use banana peels, and what I want to do today is actually make like a slow release powder that you'll be able to take some home of. I just forgot the coffee grounds. Again, with the banana peels, because I had the oven on, I just ripped them up into small pieces and just cooked them in the oven. So they're now really, and then I just put them out on the tray on the deck. They're now crispy, so you can now powder those. So this you could do, powder it, you could have all of this just in a jar, and then you could use it as a slow release or as a fertilizer. So you could use it at the start of the season, you could have it in its powder form and just chuck it on like you would any other thing. Or you could dissolve it in some water because it is a powder. Give it, 24 hours to really dissolve, and then you can just use it as a liquid fertilizer. I've also got a ton of banana peels as well, and there's different ways you can use these fresh ones. So if you wanted to use them now, a lot of people will say, especially with roses that need a lot of potassium, just bury that in the hole before you plant your roses or any really potassium-loving plants. You could just bury that in, and it's done now. A lot of people will also I know my in-laws, when they haven't had time to compost, always just bury their scraps straight into the ground, which is a fantastic way to compost really quickly and with a lot less effort. But yeah, banana peels in the soil. Some people will say, oh, but they rot, and then, animals can dig them up. Excuse me. I've never found that problem. Burying a banana in this form though is going to take time to break down, so it will be a very slow release process. Whereas and it's the same with composting. The smaller you can get a product, the faster the nutrients are going to be available. So what you can do is, you can ferment these, so you can chuck them in a jar of water, leave them for 48 hours or so, and all the potassium in here is going to leach out into the water, and then you can use that straight on your plants that need that hit of potassium for fruit sets, so your bananas, your capsicums, all of that sort of stuff. You could pour that straight on, and that's going to be a really quick instant fertilizer. Or yeah, you can powder them, you can bury them, you can chop them up, you can do a lot with bananas, or you can compost them, worm farms, all of that sort of stuff. So, do you have any questions at this point?
Nothing coming up.
All right, cool. So, how do we go for time?
10-2.
All right, so we're going to do the hands-on part now. So I'm going to say goodbye to the online because it's going to get really noisy and be a little bit pointless. So thank you for joining us live today, and we will see you next time. See ya.